All right, so let me take you through it. I'm going to start. We did introductions. Thank you very much for telling me a little about what you're working on. I'm Amy Jo Kim. I do game and product design. I do a blend of that. I've been doing it both as a freelancer and as an employee and executive for a while. I've worked on projects like Rock Band and eBay and Happify and the New York Times and a bunch of stuff with Disney. Working right now with a connected car startup called ZenDrive. I'm doing more and more work in the wearable space, but it's definitely not my specialty. But it's a space I'm very interested in, and I've started to work in, and my next few clients are also in that space, but I can't say what they are yet. Anyway, the reason I put this picture up is that I find that everybody comes at design really as a sum total of their experiences. Every one of you has had design experiences, as have I. My design experiences are very shaped by my experiences as a musician. I've played in bands for many years. Now I do much more mellow stuff. I don't tour, but I used to be a working musician. And I worked on Rock Band, which was probably the seminal game design experience of my life. It really shaped me. And in particular, it made me realize the power of having the right team in place. So that's where I'm coming from. And as we think about this, and as you look at these tools and think about how you want to apply them to your own product, be very aware of where you're coming from with design, your own experiences, your own biases, what games you've played, what products you like. That very much shapes your perspective. And just being aware of that, and being aware of that in other people as well, is for me 50% of the battle of recognizing good design. So I'm going to start with a couple of minutes of Game Theory 101, because this will be a big part of what the aha experience I hope for you is. First of all, this is a question: what is a game? There's a lot of different definitions. Obviously, it depends on the context. Here's a really common definition. This is from a textbook called Rules of Play that I've used when I've taught game design. A system with artificial conflicts and rules and a quantifiable outcome. Very common understanding of what a game could be. This basically describes a zero-sum game. In game theory, there's zero-sum and non-zero-sum games. The cut-to-the-chase definition that you need to remember is that zero-sum games, the people playing them are framed as opponents. If I win, you lose. And there's team sports and things like that, but basically zero-sum games are all about being opponents. Any head-to-head battle, boxing or any sport like that, war simulations, chess, Go, polo, all zero-sum games. Any rank order competition like the Olympics, zero-sum game. Any leaderboard is a zero-sum mechanic. Gambling is mostly a zero-sum game, although you're often playing against the house versus other players. Those are all common examples. I found as I worked in the gaming industry that more and more of the products I worked on didn't fit neatly into that definition. So I initially thought, oh great, that's what a game is. No, actually not. Think about The Sims. Does that definition work for The Sims? No. Does it work for a Tamagotchi? No. So I broadened my description, or my definition of what a game is, to include any structured experience that has rules and goals that's fun to play together. And the fun to play together part is my definition that means it's not a single player game. I don't work on single player games. I specialize in social games, multiplayer games. And even a single player game like The Sims is fun to play together with someone else. It's got that light thing. So when I use the term game throughout the rest of this definition, this is what I'm talking about. So in that sense, Indiegogo and Kickstarter are games, or gaming platforms, because they follow into this definition, and it's a broader definition. It's also, interestingly, pretty close to what a lot of non-zero-sum games are. In a non-zero-sum game, rather than the people playing being framed as opponents, you're partners. You win together or you lose together. So if you think about, say, Pictionary, or the people playing on a team have to play together and win together, or they both lose together. Think about Double Dutch if it's not in a competition. You're playing together. Without several people, you can't have fun, but the goal there is to have fun together. Karate is mostly a single-player sport, but the way it's practiced here, it's very co-op. There's competitions, but everybody is moving together. They're all helping each other. They spar with each other. They work together to achieve together. And a great example of a game-like experience that's very co-op is a charity walk, or in older times, a quilting bee, where people come together to accomplish something for a cause they all believe in that they could not accomplish together. That definition also describes every Indiegogo campaign. People coming together to accomplish something they all care about they could not accomplish together. So when you're thinking about engagement, I want to give you some really fundamental questions to ask that'll get you started. And you can come back to these questions whenever you're trying to design a new rev or really figure out how a new feature comes in. The first thing always comes down to knowing who your customers are and what kind of game they're playing or like to play. And here I have an example of a zero-sum and a non-zero-sum interaction. So the boys on the left are arguing about some sports game. You can see he's got a bat. The girls are helping each other ice skate and going around. That's a dramatic oversimplification of dynamics, but the punchline here is don't assume that everybody wants to compete. Don't assume that in fact everybody wants to cooperate either. You really have to know your audience. When you're thinking about social interaction, when you're thinking about how can we get people to engage with our product and with each other, you think really clearly about, well, who are they and how do they like to engage? You can also ask yourself another good question, how do they measure success? What's meaningful to them? Are they into building relationships? A lot of gameplay, what people really want to do is get closer to the people they play with. Some people really want to play and establish dominance. That's the point, that's the game they're playing. Some people are really into sharing content and making their content get popular. YouTube creators, people on Facebook, that's the game they're playing. Some people are really into finding that treasured object that completes their collection. It's a game that a lot of people play when they troll eBay and Etsy. So when you're thinking about who your customers are, also think about what game in that broader, not the very narrow sense, but in the broader sense, what game are they playing? What's the dynamics there? What do they consider success? And that's a good place to start when you're designing your own internal app or product systems about success. Make sure that those match up with what your customers think success is. So here's a 5-step framework that I use. You can use this and go through all 5 steps and have a productive meeting. You can use it over a period of several months to design a whole product rollout plan. But I want to give you these 5 steps for your back pocket so you can pull them out. Step 1, player insight. Who are your early adopters? How do they like to interact socially? So the reason I say early adopters, obviously we all want to have a big mass market product that everybody uses and is very popular. But if you're building innovative tech, you're going to first have to sell your early adopters. You're going to have your rabid early adopters in the classic crossing the chasm model. If you don't know about that, we'll talk about it later. And not understanding who those are and just trying to go after mass market and having personas and people coming in that are very mass market usually fails. So think about your mass market, but first really get into the minds of your early adopters. Those are the seeds that even if your mass market is broader, those are the seeds that you're going to plant to be successful. So who are you designing for and how do they like to interact? Here's 4 different models of interaction. Yes?
Sorry, we lose connection there.
Excuse me?
Sorry, we lost the screen there for a second.
Oh, is it back now? Oh, there we go. We're going to come back to these 4 different ways of interacting, but you can see that each of these people is involved in a very different game or activity that they're playing. So again, this is the first thing, is who are you designing for? Not everybody is alike. You can cut this through age, through demographics. I'm assuming, and I'm happy again to talk with you about it more, I'm assuming you guys know the basics of defining your audience and doing customer development and all that. This is what this is all about. In addition to doing customer development and understanding your audience, if you're trying to do a social product in any way, right from the start, think about how they like to interact. So how many of you have heard of Bartle's player types? 0, good, okay, great. So let me tell you about this. This is from the gaming world, and you might run into this when you're dealing with gamification, which by the way is a word I never use. I don't describe myself as that, but I do take knowledge from game design and integrate it into product development. So a lot of people that do gamification think this is a holy grail. And in 1996, Richard Bartle, how many of you know what a MUD is? Okay. How many of you know what World of Warcraft is? Okay. MUDs are the text precursors to World of Warcraft. That's what they are. They're text environments, very flexible, where you go in and you bash monsters and you get loot and you can do various things. He invented one of the first MUDs, and he built 3 different MUDs, this guy, at different universities, and he saw that the same social patterns emerged in the different MUDs, even though they were different student populations, different locations, and different themes. Same patterns kept emerging. So he captured those patterns, and he crystallized them as 4 player types: achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. Briefly, the way to understand this and remember it is think about what is on someone's mind when they first walk into an environment. It's going to apply to every app you guys build. You're going to, the first time someone sees it, something's on their mind. The thing that Bartle noticed is that some people walk into a MUD, or say World of Warcraft, and what's on their mind is, what can I do here? What can I achieve? Where's the leaderboard? Who's on top here? Is there a battle? What are the biggest trolls? You know, what's the biggest reward? That's the achiever mindset, right? And this is human nature. Some people walk into a university and that's what they do. By the way, these are all university students who are playing. Explorers walk into the exact same environment and they would want to know, they're much more involved with knowledge and location than they are with people. So explorers tend to be more content or knowledge focused. They'll say, ooh, where are all the dungeons? Are there any secret dungeons? What is there like a special keystroke that I can get into to, equip my sword faster? So they want, explorers are people that gather knowledge, they explore all the dungeons. They're the people that want to know in an organization everything that's going on. They want to make that mental map. Then that's what matters to them. So they define success as knowing a lot, whereas the achievers will define success as climbing some ladder. Socializers will walk into the same environment and they'll completely focus on the people. Not the content, not the achievement and competition, but just the people. So a socializer will walk in and say, who's here? Who's important? What's the gossip? Is she going out with him? Et cetera, et cetera. Socializers are the people you'll find in a lobby, in any kind of gaming situation. They'll be in the lobby chatting everybody up. They'll be helping newbies. They'll be doing those sorts of things. They're people focused. They measure success by the number and quality of their relationships. Killers, also known as trolls, hackers, all of that, are people that get off on messing with systems and people. So they're meta-playing the game. Killers will walk in the same environment and go, oh, look, a lobby with nice, trusted people. I think I'll pretend to be one of them and then get everybody's loot. Killers are the people that will stand in the lobby, greet somebody, kill them and take their loot, if they're a newbie. Killers will be finding the gold coin exploits that cause the whole game to shut down. Killers are often hired by game creators to be their security staff because they know all the thinking that goes into trying to find the loopholes. So these were bonus player types. If you are interested in this, go search on it. There's tons of stuff. Okay, punchline. This is a great model if you're building an MMO or a MUD or an experience like that. This works pretty well. And having built several MMOs with teams, yep, it sure works. However, for lots of other kinds of experiences, this is not the right model. And that's the place where you'll often see gamification practitioners they have no idea. They have no idea. So Richard Bartle himself recently, there he is, gave a talk saying, all this stuff, points, badges, levels, it's all achiever focused. What about the other 3 types? What about everybody else? He's also on record as saying, you could just make 4 player types for anything. Those aren't special in any way. I just made them up one day. Don't enshrine them in stone. So, as a practitioner doing design work, I kept using these and going, oh, wait a minute, this isn't working so well. When I was doing Facebook games, they didn't work so well. When I was doing work with Disney on a family network, we didn't have any killers. Killers generally don't hang out where there's lots of moms, we noticed. So it's true. I mean, they just don't have the problem. So what I did was I came up with a spin on Bartle that I find works well for myself and my clients if you're doing a social product. If you're doing a social game, if you're doing, any kind of social app, if you're trying to get that loop going, I find it much more useful. Don't think so much about player types, because the reality is most people are more than one type. I'm like a socializer, explorer, achiever, sort of, because I do those different things. But what's really useful is think about people's unmet needs and think about the quality of social interaction they're looking for. So rather than thinking about achievement, because everybody likes to achieve, if you show people that they're building a skill in general, people like that. But do they want to be competing once you've got that? A really key differentiator are people that you're targeting really juiced to compete? Is that exciting for them? Does that fit the game they're playing in their head? Or are they more interested in collaborating? Does that fit the game they're playing in their head? You know? Olympic trials versus charity walk. Similarly, here's some others. These are not addressed expression is not addressed at all by Bartle. Explore is absolutely Bartle's explore. What I found is that, and the socializer is closer to the collaborate if you're mapping Bartle, but exploring is, especially if you've got a content-rich environment, figuring out how to serve up exploration and figuring out if somebody has a need to explore the environment is very, very powerful. A lot of people are very engaged with that. And then the fourth, and possibly the most important one, is self-expression. So that's a social action. Now, you don't need other people to self-express in the way that competition really needs other people to be worthwhile. But self-expression is almost always done with an audience in mind, some sort of audience in mind. And for many people, particularly for women, self-expression is a tremendously powerful social action that they can express themselves way back to, MySpace, ugly MySpace profiles. A lot of what Instagram is about is ongoing self-expression that people are doing. And the other thing to keep in mind is that one of the needs that monetizes the best, if you're doing a free-to-play model, is self-expression. People will pay a lot to be able to express themselves with clothes, with a look, with a house, with land, in a game, or in any other kind of environment. So here's some examples. This is pure self-expression. This is a game called Toka Hair Salon. How many of you have ever seen this or played it? Do you have kids?
I have a niece.
So my daughter will spend hours, and I mean, it's a toy. This is much more like a toy, but it lets you make crazy hairstyles, and it completely hits my 6-year-old's desire for self-expression. And always, it's about, mommy, see what I made. It's not just about doing it. And then she actually tries to recreate these hairstyles in the real world, which is even more entertaining. So exploration, there's many, many examples. World of Warcraft, certainly. But here's an example from DeviantArt, which is, how many of you are familiar with DeviantArt? Yeah. And just being able to explore the wacky world and be able to slice and dice it, all this art, all this visual stimulation coming at you, a huge part of their engagement that they're getting from people. This is a good example of compete. Does anybody recognize what game this is from?
Farmville.
No.
Plants vs. Zombies.
No. Look at this guy.
Yeah, I've seen that on Pandora.
Clash of Clans. Clash of Clans, huge hit. So Clash of Clans is a really great game, and it's kind of like Heyday, which is a Farmville knockoff. But anyway, the reason I chose it is that they've got really interesting, fairly complex mechanics. But in terms of compete, if you look at a game, you can ask yourself, is this about exploration? Is this about self-expression? Is this about competing? Or is this about collaborating? Anytime you see a huge red revenge button, that's a clue that it's about competing. So that we're going to come back to that point. And then for collaborating, does anyone recognize what this is from? Yeah, thank you. How many of you have played Portal 2? Okay, that's a really good game. Beautiful co-op mode. Really good example of a well-executed co-op mode. And one of the things that you see is that there's 2 characters, and it's 2-player co-op, play together, 2 people in the same room. And when you do something well, they have a special gesture, high five, although now it would be updated to be a fist bump. And you can do that at special moments in the game. And that tells you a lot about what's important about that game. So my advice is, if you're building any kind of social app, don't worry about figuring out what your player types are. Ask yourself, what are the social actions that motivate my players? And keep asking that, and that will lead you on the right path. So that's step 1, understand insight. And that's an ongoing thing. I mean, you start that at the beginning of your project, and you form hypotheses, and you just keep testing and refining it and getting better at understanding who your people are. You're never really going to know until you ship and people actually buy it or not, but you can learn a lot through this kind of iterative assumption testing. So the second is motivation, which is all about identifying unmet needs and pain points. and knowing what's intrinsically rewarding versus extrinsically. Let me dig into that for a minute. So a lot of where gamification efforts will go wrong is when people have all the icing and none of the cake. They have the mechanics, but there's nothing intrinsically motivating that's like a core activity or a core outcome that people are going after. And if you can't identify that, then all that icing won't last. Just like icing won't keep you filled up, it won't keep people coming back. So if you're trying to build sustained engagement, you really have to go deep with intrinsic motivation. And this is also not new. I think this is just shining a light on the false promise of easy gamification. Of course you have to deliver something of value. That's what product design is all about, right? So extrinsic rewards can often backfire. If you want to know more about that, read these 2 books. At the end of this, I'll give you links to some really good summary videos. But basically, extrinsic rewards, meaning star charts and money for doing things and all the typical extrinsic rewards. If you are engaged in activity that you love and you apply extrinsic rewards to a child who's doing it, they'll stop doing the activity they love. Because you've taught them it's not worth doing on its own. It's only worth doing if you get a reward. This is a very complicated, I could talk for 5 hours about this, but I want you to walk away with the idea that it's the marriage of using extrinsic motivation and rewards and techniques to support an intrinsically motivating activity. That's the magic combo, not just one. So extrinsic rewards do work. Everybody loves a progress bar, and if what you're trying to do, turns out, and this is all supported by research, if you're trying to get your user to complete a series of simple, straightforward tasks without a lot of creativity involved, like fill out their profile, then a simple progress bar can actually work quite well. If you're trying to get them to make it through a survey, showing them how many they have left, which is exactly the same data as a progress bar, that can work really well too. So extrinsic rewards are very effective for completing simple tasks and guiding people, saying, what should I do next? But they don't work if you're trying to get the user to be deeply involved and trying to get their own internal motivation hooked up to your app. So again, the thing is, see if you can tap into intrinsic motivation first, and then build your extrinsics around that. See if you can address a need or a pain point for a micro vertical. What I mean by a micro vertical is I mean your early adopters. It's a pro tip about early adopters is if you can find a group of early adopters who know each other or have something in common, you can often get an early boost, especially if you're doing a social product. So sometimes you can't, that's how it is. But that's what if you can get a really specific vertical like this ZenDrive app I'm working on now, drivers on the peninsula who commute to work every day and, have a real need for up-to-the-minute traffic info would be one example of a very narrow micro vertical, not everybody everywhere. So these are the 3 intrinsic motivators that Dan Pink in his book Drive pulled out and gave 25 years of research summary about why these are important. Autonomy, mastery, purpose. So you might say, okay, well, intrinsic motivation, that's all well and good, but the extrinsic stuff is easy. I can get a kit. I can get a little kit to do that. It's much harder to do intrinsic. Here's a tool, okay? Autonomy is the desire to direct our own lives. Mastery is the urge to get better at something that matters to us. Purpose is, I mush purpose up with belonging. You can pull them out, but they're very related. It's the desire to be part of something larger than yourself, fundamentally. Interestingly, in psychology, there's something called self-determination theory. How many of you have ever heard of this? Okay, I was a psych major. Then I was neuroscience, and then I went into computer science. But self-determination theory was something out of the 40s, and it's based on what people care about and what motivates them. And look what we have here. Competence, autonomy, and relatedness, almost identical to Dan Pink's. So that's telling you that these guys are circling around the same core things. So autonomy, how does this manifest in you go, great, I'm building an app. How is this important to me? So autonomy is about where you give people choice. So choice, it's not just more choice is better. Too much choice or stupid choice just bogs people down. Think about onboarding when you're asked to make choices that you just aren't ready to make. That's annoying. But what you want to do is think about the choices that you give to your users as an engagement tactic and as a motivational tactic that really makes them feel that they are making a choice, that they are making something their own. So this example is from League of Legends, which is a great game. And part of why, there's many, many reasons why this game is successful. One of them is that they give you a lot of meaningful choice. They give you all these different heroes to play, and they cycle them, and they do all kinds of things, and then you can pay money to get them to just be yours versus waiting for them to cycle. There's all this mechanics around choice that always makes you, every time you log in, there's an interesting choice for you to make that materially affects the gameplay session you're going to have. And it's quick, but it's interesting. So that's one example of, okay, there's autonomy and choice actually playing out in an intrinsic motivation way. Now let's talk about competence, mastery, and learning. So these are all very related. Competence, mastery, wanting to get better at something. And learning is, to get better at something, you have to learn. I mean, they all go together, right? Many, many, many games are around building some skill, maybe not even a very important skill. Maybe it's the skill of matching 3 together. There's a skill, being able to match 3. And they build that in and make it very clear to you that you're getting better through a bunch of different, this is where mechanics come in, unlocks, levels, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that's a good takeaway from you is that even if you're not building a game, and none of you are, you can still look at your environment and say, okay, what skill are people developing by interacting with my app, by interacting with my smart jewelry, by interacting? Is there any skill at all? And if there's not, you might think about, well, there's, for sustained engagement, there's not much to learn. If there's something people are learning, is there something that, and you can even layer it on as a metagame. Maybe the skill will be, if you've got a lot of user-generated content, they can learn how to rate it really well, and then they can earn their way up to being a special person whose votes count 5 times the others. There's lots of things you can do. But a lot of what makes something compelling is that there's some skill that you can get better at, and the system gives you the feedback you need to get better at it, and the feedback you need to know that you're on the right path, that you're making progress. Third one is purpose, relatedness, and belonging. So there's tons of ways to do this. I chose the stupidest simple example I could think of, which is just a bunch of points smushed together. So this was something that Nike did. They've moved beyond this now. Nike Plus was a single player app where you just see, oh, I ran this much and I'm doing this well, and compare my stats to last week. And then they started making it more multiplayer. They have challenges and that stuff. And this is basically group XP. This is, oh, I ran this much, but we ran this much. So simple. And yet, all of a sudden, you're interacting with Nike Plus and you're like, oh, there's a we. They've introduced the notion of we into it. And you can do it just with stats. Now, that's not the most sophisticated way. But that starts to get you into purpose, relatedness, and belonging. A good backstory will do the same thing. You can use stats to show how many people in your area are using something. I think in the connected jewelry space, there's lots of stuff you can do. But I just want you to start thinking about how can you make people feel part of something bigger than themselves, and what are the hooks that you have available to you in your technology platform to start to build on that. And then even more important, going back and saying, what do people want to be part of? Because if they don't want to be part of it, none of it matters. Yes?
So this is kind of like, this group XP idea is kind of like with Indiegogo, and you can unlock a new color on the product if we get $1 million or something like that. Is that the idea?
You mean a specific Indiegogo campaign?
Like, there's been Indiegogo campaigns.
I see. You're talking about campaign reward tiers.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah. So it's kind of like that. Well, I'll talk about Group XP in a minute. I'll give you a definition for it. But yeah, I mean, the mechanic that says, "Hey, people, if enough of you do this, there'll be a prize everybody gets," is not exactly Group XP, but it's close. It's close in spirit. That's that's also just an old trick. That's like a contest trick, too. And that's the thing, is that a lot of, gamification is like old tricks with a new package. So here's a summary of the motivation and game elements. So it doesn't mean go shove all these game elements into what you're doing. It means these are examples. If you want to really target mastery and learning, mission tree, skill system, collections, all of these are techniques that you can use. So now let's talk about the player life cycle. This is where we get into the mechanics of sustained engagement. So this is a picture from a book that I wrote in 2000 called Community Building on the Web. That used to be my specialty, was online community architecture. And I realized that the biggest thing that I learned from games was just that the experience unfolds over time. People progress, and I came up with these names. They go through all these different levels of experience with your product. First they're visitors, then they become more engaged, then they become more deeply engaged. And over the years, as a designer, I realized there's really 3 key phases. And if you can think these through and nail them, at least conceptually, you will be way better set up to roll out the right systems in your design. So these are the phases for designing sustained engagement. The first is onboarding, and I would include discovery as a subset of onboarding. It's basically how people learn the ropes. And every one of you is going to have onboarding as part of your product design experience, okay? Habit building is the second. This is when somebody has basically learned the ropes and bought in, and they're now in some sort of daily or weekly or some kind of habit. Not every product has a natural habit associated with it, but part of our job as designers is to see if we can uncover the one that might be there. Habits are great, but in this framework, habits aren't everything. You have onboarding, which is very different than habit building, and a lot of people make the mistake of doing one or the other and not thinking they're 2 different things. But then mastery is, what about, maybe there's 2 to 5% of people that just get rabidly involved in what you're doing, right? You're real enthusiasts, you're evangelists. What about them? They've mastered your system. They want to do more. What do you have for them? Now, for young products and young companies, a lot of times the answer is zip up. We don't have anything for them. We'll get to that later. And that's okay. But if you think about what could we have for them, and how do the core systems that we're putting into place evolve into something that people who attain mastery could do, either for themselves or to aid the community, you're going to be better set up, and you won't be caught so unawares. So I would say mastery is an advanced topic, but very, very useful to think about. If you're doing a game, you have to think about this. So briefly, the main need newbies have during onboarding is they need to learn the ropes. So you need to welcome them. You want to give them some early goals. These are all just best practices. You want to give them a sense of progress within those goals and some achievable rewards. They don't have to be badges or coins. Achievable rewards could be you completed your profile and now you'll get use out of our app. But something that is, yeah, I put in some effort and I got some payoff. I learned what's going on. Regulars, this is about building a habit loop. Basically needs something new, something fresh. It could be fresh content. It could be new activities. It could be new challenges. It could be new people that they get to meet, but something fresh. If you think about the habit loop of Instagram or Facebook or whatever you're doing, whatever your favorite app is, if there's something that you do every single day, you do it regularly, 9 times out of 10, there's something fresh that's being delivered there, and you're going there to consume that fresh thing or to have that experience. So that's something that you really need to think about. Think about what your content strategy is if you want to build that kind of habit loop. And this is just an example from Kickstarter, which has what your friends are up to. And if you go to the Kickstarter homepage, this will be different every day because this is based on the campaigns that are most popular that my friend network is currently funding. So why would I go to Kickstarter? Just to see what my friends are up to. Oh, look at that. Oh, no, Brenda's into that. That looks interesting. There you go. You have your loop. And third, so that's newbies and regulars. Experts, in general, what experts want is something exclusive that not everybody could get. They want recognition of their expertise in some form. It could be through unlocking new experiences. It could be through a title or a badge. It could be through new powers. It could be through access to new places in the app or access to the devs. And the bottom line of what they want, when it all comes down to it, is they want impact. They want to know that they matter, that they're having some kind of impact. You can't always get there, just like you can't always design for mastery, but thinking about it is useful. So here's an example from a running app where you learn to run a 5K and you walk for 10 minutes, and it has this whole nice experience of training you up. And then, when you've been trained up a bit, boom, want to do a 5K? So you're not necessarily an expert, but you didn't get that at first. That was there, and you have to put in the time and expert, and then it acknowledges you're better than you used to be. Now you have the right, you're ready, you should go run a 5K. That's a very, very simple example of the idea that there's, and this, I think the takeaway for you is it's very important if you're not a game designer and you're trying to create an experience that unfolds over time, think about what to hold back. Think about, imagine a timeline where like, first my customer is gonna have this experience and this and this, rather than just giving them everything at once. Think about what they might experience week 2, 3, 4, 5 into it that's new, that's different for them. Some of it's just part of the content loop, and some of it could be whole features. And I find that a lot of times that's the hardest thing for web developers or app developers to get their arms around, because they want the customers to know all their great features right away, because they're great features. But if what you're really doing is designing an experience in the way a game designer designs an experience, it's all about doling things out over time at just the right moment. So this brings us to progress, which is fundamentally the path to mastery. So ask yourself, what are the markers and the feedback I'm giving to my players, my customers, that tells them that they're making progress? So if you think about a lot of what we've been surrounded with gamification, badges and stats and all that stuff, think about them as not as manipulation techniques, but think about them as lights on the path that tell you, yes, you're on the right path. Yes, you're making progress. Yes, you're meeting your goals. And then that tends to give you a much better design framework to work from. So there's 4 kinds of points. So the bottom line of any progress is usually points. Whether you show them in the interface or you don't show them in the interface, at some point, if you're going to quantify progress, you're going to have to keep track of it. So I want to tell you the 4 key types of points, and you'll never be confused again when you run into this. First kind is skill points. Skill points are earned if you interact with some sort of system. There has to be a game, something game-like for there to be skill points. So a good example of personal skill points would be Bejeweled. How many of you have played Bejeweled? Okay, that's people that will admit. I'm just kidding. So this is you play and you get a certain number of points that say how well you played. Very simple. Then there's personal, and there's also group or collective skill points where more than one person is playing together. So this is Dance Central, which is a Connect game. And you can see that these 2 people, these are both real people dancing, they both have the same score. They don't pull out separate scores. So this is a co-op mechanic, right? We talked about co-op and compete. But this is also collective skill points. Together we earned 424,000. The second kind of points is experience points. Experience points are different than skill points in that they're much broader. It's, first of all, a unidirectional metric. Skill could go up and down. If you think about ELO ratings in chess, for instance, it can go up and down. Experience points, unidirectional, they only go up. They're cumulative. And they reflect an individual's actions. They reflect skill as well, but they're primarily about persistence. So if somebody just keeps banging away at something, their XP will keep going up. If somebody is very good at that same activity, their XP will go up faster, but it'll still go up. So for instance, there's an example from Nike Plus. That's really, you might say, okay, what's this? This is personal XP. That's how much that person has earned. They hit some goals. These are punctuation on top of the XP, but it's all about just what you yourself did. The example I gave you earlier, that's group XP. It's like we all together, everybody who ran, this is how many miles they all ran together. Now it's interesting to look at that with a later screen. This is a compare. This is not group XP, but like here's my XP. Okay, that's what I did, and this is what other people are doing. And this is competitive. This isn't like we, and let's not divide it out and say who did better than other. This is like you are not doing as well as people your age. So this is designed to be motivational. Third kind is currency. So people a lot of times get confused between XP and currency. Currency is often almost identical to XP in the way it's used, but it's bidirectional. It can be earned and it can be spent, whether it's virtual currency or real currency. So here's a good example of several kinds of currency. This again is Clash of Clans. And over here we have XP. This is the person's XP, and it's associated with levels, which you see a lot. This over here is coins, a basic currency that's earned in the game. This is jewels, which is a premium currency that's earned a little bit and purchased. Very, very common division. But the XP is different. And if you play a game like this, you'll see these little animations coming out where you earn like 3 or 4 things for each action. And those are the different things you earn. The reason this is important is that if you are designing any kind of these systems for your product at any point, you really need to be clear on what you're doing. And maybe the most common newbie mistake is people say, oh, earned currency is good, let's let them earn points. And then they can spend the points because then they'll value the points. And that's just confused, because XP earns you privileges. Currency can be bought, can be earned and spent. But it's just very important to know which of these point systems is right for your product, and then design it to make sense as a coherent system. A lot of the requests that come into my mailbox that I don't take usually are people that worked with a gamification vendor, did it on their own, put some sort of point system in, were really excited about it, saw some lift the first month, and then it just kind of settled into being confusing, and nobody really understood where it was going and what the purpose of it was, and et cetera. So that just happens a lot, and I don't want it to happen to you. Fourth type, social points. Different than all these others, okay? Social points are points that you don't earn through your own actions. They're earned through other people reacting to the artifacts you've left. Facebook likes are social points. Instagram hearts are social points. Let's look at Amazon. So Amazon reviews aren't social points, they're just user-created content. But when Amazon said, was this review helpful, and put that in, that's a social point. That's other people reacting to your artifacts. Why was that a brilliant thing to do? Because now they've got a system that they can use to automatically order reviews by usefulness. Simple as that. Stack Overflow. How many of you have used Stack Overflow? I love Stack Overflow. So their reputation system is a great example of social points. It's a little bit muddy if you go and you look at exactly what earns points. Some of them are your own actions, like voting something up. But most of what is in there is reputation, other people valuing your input. Another example of League of Legends. They fairly recently introduced social points for sportsmanship. And what happened was, League of Legends is a very rough and tumble and kind of nasty community. There was a lot of trolling and people dropping out of matches, they were losing, and all this really bad behavior. And so the internal team really wanted to figure out, and they already had a system in place for punishing the bad guys, which is also very interesting, called a tribunal. That's for another day. But they were like, okay, well, we're punishing the bad guys, but we really want to, just like good parenting, you want to shine a spotlight on good behavior. We want to reward good guys, not just punish bad guys. How can we do that? This is what they came up with. So after a match, people can recognize you as a team member, and a little thing pops up after a match. It said, this person you were playing with, were they friendly? Were they helpful? Did they show good teamwork? Click. And then that becomes points that are associated with that player, and they can get various privileges based on that. These points are also taken into account if they do something bad. When people are judging, should they be banned? Should they just get a slap on the wrist? They'll look at this record. So those are social points in a very complex gaming system, another kind of social points. But you get the idea. Social points are other people reacting to you. And when you're doing any kind of social product, almost always you're going to want some kind of social point system. Devil's in the details of making that work really well. So, just a few words on feedback levels, rewards, and unlocks. So I just talked to you about points. Think of that as the foundation of your progress house that you're building. Okay, well, how do you give context and meaning to those points? That's, again, a big thing. You just see, you've earned 3,680 points. What does that mean? You know? So this is the answer. By giving good feedback, by having levels, by having rewards, and having unlocks, you create more of a rhythm and a narrative to a basic underlying point structure. So leaderboards, very popular. They basically showcase your most skilled and devoted players. Leaderboards also backfire a lot. So you want to be really careful and not just go, oh, leaderboards are great. If you are trying to create a non-competitive, more co-op environment, leaderboards might really be bad. You can also, there's a lot of things you can do with leaderboards, like velvet rope them, so only the people that are likely to be on them can see them, and they don't depress all the newbies who look at them and think, oh, I could never get that many points. So there's a lot of nuance around how to use them effectively, but they're definitely a powerful tool. It's also really good to be able to slice and dice them so more people can show up. Leaderboards in this city, leaderboards in this age group, leaderboards, right? You can put different kinds of things if you are going to use leaderboards. There's social leaderboards, which are basically leaderboards with you and your friends on them. That's what a social leaderboard is. Here's an example from the Sims Online. And the thing I wanted to point out here is, why have a social leaderboard? What good is that? Okay, so you can see the order of people. But in Facebook games, the big aha for devs like me is, well, once you have a social leaderboard, you can do actions. It's like a shortcut. Here's my friends. Here's how we stack up. Now I want to do this. It's like a quick shortcut action. So what can you do here? You can visit or you can ask over. Do those sound like competitive things or cooperative things? Yes. So this right from here, these actions set the tone. In Clash of Clans, I think it's like pummel, compete. You know, like those actions are much more competitive. So that's something to really think about if you're gonna, a lot of people get excited about friend leaderboards, like, oh, friend leaderboards, me and my friends. Sometimes that makes sense. But if you're gonna list people in some order based on some metric, see if you can introduce an action that creates the vibe that you want in your community and starts to create the habit loop that we've been talking about. So let me give you a little example. So I pulled this up from the most recent Nike Plus Connect training leaderboard. So here's this person who's looking at it, and this is the leaderboard. And this is it. So here we have this leaderboard. So what feeling do you see that? Okay, well, how does this set the tone? Like, what feeling do you get when you look at that? What does that tell you about this? What's important in this app?
Numbers.
Numbers, yep. And pure rank ordering. Like, so that you can't, like, this person here, can you congratulate them? Can you do anything with that information here? No, it's just a leaderboard, it's a list. So to me, that's a missed opportunity. I mean, I understand you can't do everything, but that certainly doesn't make me want to use that app. It's like, really? Just seeing if they did better than me, but like. On the other hand, if you're really competitive, and this would be the, oh my God, I have to beat her this week, might work really well. What does that come back to? The first point I made, know your audience. Know what motivates them. So missions are a great technique. Missions for me are far more useful than leaderboards, just in terms of broad applicability to lots and lots of design work. Missions are just a way to guide and motivate the player. They can be framed as a to-do list. They can be framed as a daily tip. They can be framed as a lot of different things. But if users are like, what do I do now? often a mission system can be a great answer to that. How many of you have played Clumsy Ninja? Oh, seriously, you gotta get on this, guys. Anyway, it's a great iPad game. My 7-year-old is addicted to it. So, but it's got, if you ever want to look at a beautifully done mission system for inspiration, this is their mission system. So go play that app, download it. You'll play for 5 minutes and you'll see the mission system. And it's just beautifully done. It tells you what to do. It backs off slowly. It's very much part of onboarding. And so later on, I'm going to talk to you about different exercises you can do to understand what the missions would be. But the missions you would give during onboarding might be quite different than the missions you would give someone who'd been playing for 2 months, for instance. Unlocks, closely associated but not the same thing as missions, are a great way to reveal functionality and complexity over time. So an unlock is a piece of interface or functionality in your app, in your experience, that somebody can't get to until they keep progressing. Think about what you can hold back and dole out over time, and then think about framing what you dole out over time as the person has unlocked something. And then you have a moment where they're like, oh, I unlocked this. Then you can tell them about it. You can educate them about it without having to have them do everything right at the beginning. So in the drive engagement over time, unlocks are one of your, they're sort of like a superpower. They're extremely useful. You don't have to call them unlocks. You can call them whatever you want. But think about that as a way of managing the complexity of your app. You can also, again, with all of this stuff, think about the single player experience and also think about the multiplayer experience. Group unlocks. What would a group unlock look like? Well, go play Call of Duty and you'll see group unlocks. So actually these are called clan unlocks here. But this is where everybody in a group that's defined themselves as a group earn together. Just like that picture I showed you earlier of Dance Central where 2 people are playing and they both are contributing to a shared score, but they can't see the difference. This is like that, but a little bit more structured. So if everybody in your clan accomplishes certain things, boom, you get a clan unlock. So it's more complex. So you don't want to like go do that at the beginning. Like a lot of times that's just a complex mechanic, but super, super powerful for getting people to have sustained engagement. Not every app wants to have groups in it, but people playing for their group is much, much stickier than people playing for themselves. So I can't tell you the number of times when I've been interviewing players for multiplayer games where I heard a version of, you know, I came for the game and then I got really sick of the game, but my clan needs me, my group needs me. Have any of you ever had that feeling? That is a very, very powerful thing. So if you can introduce group mechanics and it works for what you're doing and you're not shoving it in, it's incredibly sticky. And it's a really, really powerful thing. Okay, we made it. Now we're almost done. So this is probably the meatiest subject and the one that's the most sort of brain hurting when you sit down and try to apply it. Loops. So this is what I call an engagement loop. And this a very similar framework with a few differences, you will see as activity loops, game loops, core loops, habit loops. You'll see these expressed in a lot of different ways. And there's nothing sacred about this. It's just a collection that I find useful for analytic purposes. And the other thing that's probably different than other things you say is down here. This is called a job story. How many of you have ever heard of job stories? Okay. So you can go read up about that. If you follow me on Twitter, I've tweeted a lot about that. It's a tool like scenarios and personas that helps you design to address people's needs and real situations is what it is. So let me just take this apart for you. So let's say you go, okay, I want to build a daily habit. I'm ready, I think my app, my hardware, my whatever, I want to figure out what the daily habit of my player is going to be. Okay, this is what you start. Start with a trigger plus an engaging activity. What does that mean? The trigger can be either external or internal. Ideally, it's both, but an external trigger is a notification. It's your alarm clock going off in the morning. It's, your wife calling you or your boyfriend calling you to plan dinner. I mean, there's a lot of triggers in life, but the trigger is the thing that reminds somebody to come use your app. If you're dealing with, connected jewelry and there's some engaging, maybe it's putting on your jewelry or taking it off, or who knows. But it's some moment. If you're trying to get yourself to floss more, the trigger is, I'm brushing my teeth, oh, I'm going to reach for the floss. You attach it to another habit. So the other thing it says here is engaging activity. This gets into the icing and the cake thing. So if you don't have an engaging activity in your app, there's not much you can do to drive sustained engagement. Like, all this stuff won't last. There has to be something that people actually care about that delivers some value to them. That's like the little golden nugget. So once you define what that is and you've got it, after or even during them engaging in the activity, you give them feedback and progress. Feedback is the most important. Feedback that says, yes, you did something. Sometimes the feedback is you earn some points. Sometimes it's just a visual effect. Sometimes it's completing an activity, like completing a run would be feedback. And progress is if you've got a progress system that you've defined, figure out. Sometimes there isn't any progress, like you just haven't gotten there yet. But if you want to define a progress system, this is the moment where you show the person you made this much progress, and you show them the context. You made this much progress against your weekly goal. You made this much progress, 3 more sessions and you'll level up, and then you'll get access to the great lands of Gornath or whatever. And that is designed to elicit a motivating emotion. So this isn't here so much as a separate step. This is here because part of your analytic task is to think about what the emotions are. And in particular, this moment when someone's done something and they made some progress, they are primed emotionally for you to then ask them for something and to keep pushing them along the way. But again, a really common mistake when I do an audit for somebody, it's like, what's not working about this game? You'll see that they have like a really nice feedback system, but then there's nothing to like harvest that or take advantage of it. They just go on and do something else. So think about the emotions right from the trigger all the way to here. Think about what those are. It doesn't have to be fun. So it's a myth to say that, well, to make this engaging, it has to be fun. It might be fun. It might be that fun is the emotion, but it might be curiosity. It might be delight. It might be trust. It might be a sense of belonging. You can give them, like the Nike feedback is designed to give you more of a sense of belonging, right? So that kind of emotional awareness of what arc you're taking your player on in your habit loop is super important. And then the last piece is the CTA, or call to action. That's short for call to action. So once you've given them an activity and you've given them some nice feedback and progress, and they're having these emotions, boom, what do they do next? Is that the moment when you ask them to share? Well, only if it makes sense for them. We'll get into that in a minute. Some of you said you wanted to get people to share more. People will share if it makes sense to them, if it builds the identity they wish to present to other people. But this is the other thing is if you have to ask them at the right moment. So this is part of your analytic arsenal for asking them. The CTA might be, you're done, come back tomorrow. It might be, hey, you want to help someone else? It might be, hey, you earned the right to compete in a tournament. It might be any number of things. If you're familiar with Nir Eyal's habit loop, which is kind of a simplified version of this, he talks about the ask. He said you ask people to do something for you. I don't think an ask is always appropriate, not for every application, but it's like a subset. It's useful to think about. This is very, very similar structurally. So taking people through this loop, you can think about yourself when you use Instagram or your favorite app or Refresh.io or whatever app you use. There's essentially some version of this that you're going through. So the other thing is, remember we talked about the life cycle. What this loop should look like is going to change. Onboarding is fundamentally different than habit building. During onboarding, you're learning to do something. During habit building, this is just a good way to ask yourself. You say, okay, during onboarding, what is my player learning to do? What is it? What is the ropes? What is it that they have to learn to get use out of my product? During habit building, what are they doing? I'm asking them to check in daily to do what? Okay? For example, this driving app I'm working on right now, we've gone through several ideas about what the habit loop is. One of them is right before you get in your car, ask them to check in and you can tell them what the route looks like, if there's any unusual traffic stuff, any weather conditions. That's something to build a habit loop off. It's not for everybody, but for some people that's like incredibly important. That's the thing they're gonna check in daily to. Make sure the thing you're asking them to check in daily to do delivers real value to them. It isn't just, you know, this thing you're manipulating them to do. And then for mastery, what are they becoming skilled at? And what does the end point of that skill look like? What do they get to do? So here's some examples. These are actually from, all the details are taken out, but these are from a real project I worked on. So for first engagement, for onboarding, your loop might end up looking something like that. What's the trigger to discover what you're doing? It might be you get an email from a friend, or you see a Facebook, Twitter post, or you see a banner ad somewhere, or you see there's some trigger, right? And then you come in, and what's the activity? Here it was view content and then interact with content in that particular thing. Interact could be like, share, add to, etc. The feedback and progress in this particular case was, trying to remember what it was. It was showing you your stats on people interacting with your content. Because for instance, how many likes you've given altogether is not very interesting. How many and how fast likes were collected by your last days of post is very interesting to you. So that's what that was in this particular case. And then the call to action is either give more feedback, share more content, depending on what it is in that what they're doing. Now here's the re-engagement, habit building loop. This is more complicated. Why? Because there's more going on. Remember I said unfold functionality over time? A lot of times there'll be more going on in this habit loop. So here, if you had social feedback, meaning if things were all hooked up, there might be new messages waiting for you. If you didn't have your Facebook graph hooked up, there might just be new content waiting for you. But in that habit loop, there's going to be new something. Remember I told you there has to be something new, or you can't. It's just really hard to build a habit loop without that. So here's the new stuff. Comes in, and you're either going to be reading and responding to messages in your message box, or you're going to be browsing content, because those are like the two input paths. And then from there, there's various things you can do, and you go all the way around the loop. Now what about system mastery, which I think of as deep engagement? Well, for this person, in this particular case, they're always getting new messages and content because they're helping to keep the service running at this point. They're like editing content. And they come into their personalized dashboard that shows you, here's the stuff we want you to look at that's been flagged for review. You're like a user that's going to help us with this. And it comes to there, then they sit there and do their activity in there. And eventually they'll get more powers if they keep doing that and providing utility. But this is completely different than the feedback loop for the habit building everyday user, because this person is engaged in a mastery activity that they've earned and unlocked through their earlier activity. So that's just an example. And the punchline here is that this is a useful tool. It's very flexible, and doing it for like first day, first week, first month, 6 months in, just sketching that out can be incredibly illuminating. If you spend an afternoon doing that, you'll have a very different picture of what your user experience might look like. So here's a quick summary of the tools. There's a 5-step framework. Again, it's just an analytic tool to really help you hone in on what's going to deliver value to your users and how to get them hooked. Product defining social actions. So this is says, it's hard to see, collaborate, compete, express, explore. So this is a matrix that shows lots of examples of actions that would be self-expression or exploration, etc. This is, you can do this as an exercise. You can say, okay, what are the 5 product defining actions in my product? Where do they fall? And does that match with who I'm trying to target? if you are trying to target really competitive sales guys, you should probably have a lot of them show up in here because that's the kind of culture they have, that's what they expect, that's how they engage. If you're doing something more like deviant art, it's gonna probably fall right around in here, maybe a little bit here, maybe a little here, but it's really about self-expression, the loop between self-expression and exploration. That's the engine that makes that site work. So this is a way for you to, one, really get defined about, well, what is my product all about? How am I going to communicate to users through every action they take what my product's all about? And then say, okay, and it doesn't match what I'm trying to do. Does it match who I think I'm targeting? And this can help you fill in the holes in your strategy. Here's the habit building engagement loop. And let me tell you how to use, so this is a job story. Here's how it goes. When trigger happens, I want to do some activity, the goal, so I can have some outcome. Very, very, very simple, but really good. So when you're building these loops, imagine you're building the habit loop. By the way, it's really good to start with a habit loop when you're like, and then do onboarding and mastery, because it'll just help ground you in the core value prop. So you might say, and this is from the user's point of view. So for the driving app, which is the one most on my mind, we did a ton of this kind of work. So one example would be when I'm eating breakfast, I want to check traffic conditions on my smartphone so I can get to my first meeting on time. There's an example. I just filled all that in. When it's time to leave work, when it's 5 o'clock, I want to something so I can know where I'm going that night, make it to my girlfriend's house on time for dinner, whatever it is. So I would really encourage you to take that little job story and just as a follow-up, see if you can make a habit loop that uses that to help you define what is going on. And then the trigger is going to be the thing here. The activity is going to be the thing here, maybe mushed with that. And the outcome is going to be the payoff for the user that makes them keep using their app. And again, the punchline here is you've got to be really focused on the outcome that your user wants. It's very easy to get, oh, this feature's cool and it's fun to use with. It's fun to use and we can like and collect stats and show them stats. That's great. What outcome are they looking for? What's the punchline? What's the pain point? And then remember through the life cycle, remember to ask yourself these questions. And if this seems like too much, just start with these two. Don't worry about mastery. And then this is something that I use a lot. It's a little more advanced, but this can be a great tool for the big aha when you're trying to, especially if you're trying to diagnose why isn't our engagement working? Think of it, we all know what a funnel is, what a new user funnel is. They come in and they drop off at various points. So you can apply that same idea to engagement. The first thing is discovery. They discover your app. They discover your hardware, whatever it is. And that has its own form of engagement. But it's pretty much you're moving through discovery. You either drop off or not. And then there's light engagement. What is the very first kind of engagement that you offer people? What can they do? So this is quite simple, but if you think about, if you can map your engagement just into layers, and the light is, so for instance, let's take Facebook. First thing you do is you just read, right? You read people's posts. That's the first thing you can do other than setting it up. And then you can like, and then you can comment, and then you can make your own posts. And those are all different levels of commitment and layers of engagement. So this is something that you can also think about. So that's a very, very broad and fast overview of this framework. That's how you contact me if you want to contact me. I'm going to, as I said, I'll share this so all of you can get a copy of it. This is for you to read more about some of the resources that I shared with you today. Really just a starting point, but those are the things that I talked about. And when you see the actual deck, it'll take you right to the resources. And that's all. So thank you. Who's got a question? Yes.
On your first slide, you showed the automatic app. And so I'm curious to hear your feedback on how you think, whether you think that that's an engaging app or.
I think it's got a lot of promise, but it's not that engaging yet. I showed that because it was a pretty picture. I didn't show it because I think it's the greatest example of engagement ever. I just really showed it because it's a picture that shows somebody engaging with a mobile app, and I think that's a lot of where engagement is happening right now is on mobile. Do you think it's an engaging app?
I have it, and that one, the nice pictures that you see of, like, how far you've driven or what your score is. I don't really see it as an engaging app. I mean, I've never gone through it. My score is always, like, I don't know, in the 90s or hundreds.
Does it mean anything to you?
I guess it changed depending, like, if you're really like harsh driver, then you get a low score. If you're a good driver, it's a good score. But like once you've reached that, like, I don't know, like what else you're supposed to do with that. I mean,
Exactly, and there's the problem with it. I think it's an interesting demo of functionality, but I don't think the whole thing hangs together as driving sustained engagement. If it delivered on a pain point, it would be a different matter. If it like got you better insurance rates, for instance, then that would be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
Pretty quick question. So one of the first slides you showed, you were mentioning that there's a collaboration and then there's a zero-sum game. And a couple of the examples that you show for the collaborative gaming goals, where the goal is not to win, but rather to have fun. I think it was a bit confusing for me because I think some of those examples were still competitive in nature, meaning that the outcome is still we win, you lose. The only
Right.
difference is that it's not one-to-one, it's many-to-many.
So
Like, for example, soccer, football, basketball, it's still zero-sum. The only difference is that it's not one-to-one, it's many-to-many.
So team sports are a mix of zero-sum and non-zero-sum.
Okay.
So a team sport with a winner and loser is a zero-sum game.
Mhm.
Inside of each team, those people are playing a non-zero-sum game together.
Okay.
Part of why team sports are so powerful
Mhm.
and so prevalent all over the world is
Mhm.
because I think of that mix. So, for instance,
But you can't play the game unless you have an opponent. So how is it a game? And that's the part that was confusing to me. How is it a game if you're not competing? In the case of, I
exactly,
believe you showed.
that was the point I made, is that we think, oh, unless you're competing, it's not a game. But The Sims is a game and you're not competing.
True, but the example that you showed there was Pictionary.
Right.
And I think you can't really play Pictionary unless you're competing. Otherwise, the game as stated by the rules just doesn't work.
Right, that's right. So that's a team sport. So Pictionary requires teams.
Mhm.
And it's the two people on a team that are playing a non-zero-sum game. So my goal, if I'm playing Pictionary with you, my goal is to make sure you can understand the thing I'm drawing,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I'm not competing against you. We either
Sure.
win together or we lose together.
Sure.
But the other team, we're gonna be competing against them, so it's a mix.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to get, thank you for the feedback though, that was confusing. I could probably pick a different example that was less confusing.
Well,
But
or maybe
most-
make the difference of team games versus non-team.
So so the other thing is, I have a whole workshop and then a shorter talk on co-op gaming.
Mhm.
And if you guys are interested, I could do that at a future time. You can also go to, I think there's a version of it on YouTube, or there's gonna be, but it goes really deep into this and like how to identify what a co-op or non-zero-sum game is.
Mhm.
And the punchline,
Mhm.
there's a lot of various co-op mechanics, but the punchline is that pure non-zero-sum games have people competing against a system, not against each other.
So video
So-
games are zero-sum games or not?
No, it depends on the video game. The
Okay.
Sims is not a zero-sum game,
Okay.
for instance. But if you want to create a non-zero-sum game that's not a team sport, because team sports are the easiest way to have zero-sum plus non-zero-sum. but you still have to have the team playing together. Usually, again, 9 times out of 10, the design is that you're setting people up to compete against the system. So an example would be the pandemic board game. There's a fire, a house is on fire, and you and all the people you're playing with are trying to get the people out before the fire burns the house down. You're competing against the system. A Kickstarter campaign is you're competing against the system. There's a ticker, and in Kickstarter it's all or nothing. Indiegogo has flex funding, which is different. Kickstarter is more game-like. Here's the goal. You got 30 days, you gotta meet it or not. Hey everybody, help me meet my goal. You're all playing together, but you're clearly competing against the system, right?
Yeah.
The system has limits. So that's like the first of the 7 principles I talk about in this other talk. So I could probably give examples like that, and it would be less confusing. So thank you for that feedback. Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? 2 there. You.
Go ahead. All right. What I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, and for the differences there, and sort of why extrinsic rewards can be harmful to progress.
Sure. So let's see. So the place to probably go back to is so there's some, right? So these are intrinsic. Well, actually these aren't pure intrinsic. So let's see. So when you say, I usually talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So an intrinsic reward would be, I feel really good because I worked at the soup kitchen last night and I served soup to 100 people and I feel really warm and good. That would be an intrinsic reward, okay? An extrinsic reward would be, I got paid, that's my job. I showed up because that's my job. I serve soup to people at the soup kitchen. Another intrinsic reward would be, I'm trying to think of an example. Can any of you think of an example? Actually, let me turn that back around. Can you think of an example of an intrinsic versus extrinsic reward in a situation that you're in? Maybe here at Highway 1, the way that things are set up.
Well, I mean, back in school, study to learn and then get a grade for it.
Sure, that's another good example. So, right, some people are like, I don't care that much about the grade, I'm just into the learning. Or go to college because I want a better job versus go to college because I want to attain knowledge and enrich myself. But the reality is it's often a very blurry line. Like for instance, what do I have here? I have mission trees. Is that extrinsic or intrinsic? It's both. It's mission trees are scaffolding to help you get better at something. But they're also, completing a mission has a very extrinsic moment from it. I think the reason that extrinsic rewards backfire is that they can, I'm trying to think of a way to summarize it. Extrinsic rewards can communicate to the person receiving the award that the activity they're doing is not inherently valuable in itself. It's only valuable insofar as you do it to get a reward. The famous study is they took a bunch of kids, half of whom loved reading, and half of whom would never pick up a book at home, and they paid them to read. They paid them by the page. And they did it for like 6 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And then they stopped. It was like 3rd graders or something. And then they tracked what happened at home after the study. And what happened was none of the kids read at home anymore when they weren't paid, including the kids who used to pick up a book every night. And to me, that's the nutshell of extrinsic rewards. But it's also what happens to you when you see, a point system that doesn't mean anything. You look at it for a while, and then it kind of makes you lose interest in the app. Because it's like, all right, well, there, so,
But how can you bring out that, how can you reward that intrinsic, how can you point them towards what's intrinsically motivating within reading without an extrinsic reward system? Like, you still want to communicate to the individual or the kid that reading is inherently valuable to you. Maybe so how do you actually do that without, paying them or something like that? How do you?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. You can have a reading group, so you make it more social, where they talk about it. For some kids, I've done that with my kids in school, to get kids to read more. They create little reading groups. There's a different way, and that can work really well. You can, get mom and dad to snuggle with you and cuddle with you when you read. That's intrinsically rewarding, where you're not being paid. There's all kinds of things you can do. You could call that, is that intrinsic or extrinsic, right? But it's, what you're doing there is you're associating something positive, or you're layering on something that enhances the activity, rather than a pure, extrinsic motivator. It's a very complicated subject.
So just a note to have, it's a really interesting discussion for me. I guess something I find kind of interesting is, why would children read? Your comment is interesting, because a child is presented a book and it's either like, read this because you have to, or read this because it's interesting, or they might see a person they aspire to be, or they respect or admire, like a parent reading, and then they emulate that activity as a way of sort of aspiring towards that person. So do you have a comment on that sort of idea of like people taking up activities without being extrinsically rewarded as a way of sort of aspiring to be others, or be something that they're
Sure,
not?
I mean, that's one of many motivations and it works for some people. So you could take that same story and apply it, say, in a game setting. So the very first game I ever worked on was Ultima Online, which is an early MMO. And there was the head of that whole company had an in-game persona called Lord British. How many of you know Lord British? Or know, he wrote all these games, and he put in, it's like a cult thing, okay? Anyway, so there were, in that game, one of the reasons they hired me is that they built a reputation system that had completely horrible, unexpected side effects, which often happens. And they had this reputation system, and people were abusing it, and it was all, it was all messed up, and they weren't getting people to behave the way they wanted. There was a lot of griefing, there was just all this stuff. So what they actually did was they had Lord British and then some other people that were sort of known in the community for a couple of weeks just be around a lot, like helping the villagers and doing these sort of role model kinds of things so that people would emulate them, and it actually worked. It was like, oh, look, he did that. So they actually used exactly what you're talking about as to shift away from this. The reputation system was meant to really just be a tracking system, but it was backfiring. And so they wanted them to just emulate their hero. And they made the hero much more visible, and then sort of created these gossip trails around him as a way of trying to get people to behave better. So that's just one example. But, the thing that really interests me is how this applies to product design. So there's, getting kids to read, but then there's product design. So, here's a really concrete example, again, going back to this driving app. When we first started working on it, they had an idea that was very, very close to pay people to drive. They just wanted people to use the app because they needed people to use the app to get enough data into the system to do the analytics that would deliver value. So a very Trojan horse, chicken and egg-ish situation. So the question is, how can we build an MVP that actually gets people to use the app without that, but so we can get to our longer term vision? First idea, have a weekly prize, and every time you drive, you're entered in a raffle. That was the first idea. Nice idea, probably not sustainable. That's gonna get boring. Pure extrinsic motivation. There's actually no value. It's not delivering any value. It's just it's like a slot machine, right? So that's one idea. So then we did a bunch of research and a bunch of brainstorming, but especially the research turned up a very real pain point, which is people were not able to get, am I going to get to work on time if I leave at 7:35? They were not able to quickly get that from their current driving apps, pre-commute. And they wanted that, and they wanted it quickly, and they wanted it in a packaged form, so they didn't have to look at 2 or 3 different apps. And so it's like, oh, okay, well that's That's intrinsic motivation. They need some information to make their life better. So then we built a whole system around delivering that instead of the raffle thing. So that's really clear to me. And part of why we did that is they went through this whole analysis, the team, and they had a dark night of the soul because we went through this analysis and then they're like, oh. It's like they realized that we got to actually deliver value. So, and that's the punchline is that, you know, the thing about extrinsic, intrinsic, it's not simple. It's like sometimes people use a star chart and they build a habit and then they're done with the star chart and the habit sticks. Sometimes there's a star chart and they stop using the star chart and they stop doing the behavior. It's not always the same. It has to do with a lot of things. It probably has to do with things like whether there's a role model around the house like you're talking about. You know, why do my kids read so much? Because my husband and I read so much. You know, it's like, so it's all of that. Yes. Oh, and this, did you have a question too?
Yeah, the question is,
You, after, yeah.
Like we were talking about extrinsic motivations, but it seems like if you add extrinsic motivations that aren't tied to some kind of intrinsic motivation, you get the phenomenon of just pointless points.
Right.
But if you tie them too directly to like, you know, paying money for reading, then it just seems like you're kind of sending the wrong message there. But so is there like a Goldilocks zone in the middle? Is it just a kind of extrinsic
Yeah, I think there's a
reward, or,
Goldilocks zone in the middle, and
or
I
how
think
you
it
frame
depends
it?
on all the details. Depends on the task, it depends on the context, it depends on all that stuff, which is true of design in general. It's like, there's not like one clear rule. There's absolutely a Goldilocks, but I like the thing you said, and I wanna heighten that for the rest of you as a take home, which is packaging them together is actually what you wanna do. Like think about any good game you've ever played, as opposed to say crappy games. Now I play a lot of crappy games because I'm in the games industry, so I play games, and some of them are really crappy. And a lot of times while they're crappy is they don't have that magic, they're not in the Goldilocks zone. They don't mend, you know, if you have Call of Duty without all the great feedback and level up mechanisms, it wouldn't be nearly as fun. But if you just had all the feedback and not the pew, 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 you know, it wouldn't be fun either. So it's that Goldilocks zone. I like that, the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if your app and kind of product is built around something that isn't a daily activity. You know, do you think it's kind of crucial to really start thinking about how you know it's a kitchen scales for baking. People don't ordinarily bake every day, so do you think it's crucial to, if we're going to include a social element from launch, to really be thinking about how there can be a daily or definitely a weekly engagement, even if they're not
You know, it's
actually
not
baking?
crucial for everybody. It's
Yeah.
like if you want there to be, then you think about it, and if you think it's natural. But if you still think about it, you might come to the conclusion that there isn't a natural one. But then what you do want to think about is the hook. So it's like, given that you're doing a scale, it's like it depends on what you want to do. Are you thinking about like doing an app that has nothing to do with the scale? That's just like another thing.
It'd be great to show you the app actually and get your thoughts on it, because it'd be great to show you the app and get your thoughts on it at some stage, because there's a lot of the things that we've already started to feed into the app in a way, but we want to push that little bit more as well.
I see. But yeah, so I mean, the thing about the daily is, it doesn't have to necessarily be daily, but think about pain points and unmet needs. Like, is it planning dinner, what to make for dinner? Is it, you know, it's like, what is it that
Definitely
people,
something that would be like usable, the app, the soft app will be usable without the hardware for certain things like browsing, discovering, exploring. It's great seeing those words, because that's kind of a lot of what our app will be about, and then also user submitted content. So there will be a whole sort of, you know, we're just getting to that point of like working out how the feedback mechanisms work, how good recipes trickle up to the at the top, how to encourage people to submit and also encourage people to bake. So there's lots of interesting things we're looking at, and we're definitely looking. We have been always using the word gameplay or gaming elements, and to sort of slip them in there, so it's not really it's not a game. It's a people will actually be making things that have to eat at the end. But we'd like to gamify some elements of it. So.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, to me, the gamify thing comes later after you've figured out
Yeah.
what core need you're meeting.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you think about like that loop, then when you're in, product design in the wild and real product design, then you're also thinking about your competitive landscape. Like you're saying, oh, well, the app could do other stuff and, but then you go, okay, well, what about do we want to compete with all those other food
Yeah.
apps?
Yeah.
Is there a niche that's not fully being met? And get into all that strategic product design
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, that's part of it too. This is just like this is a layer of product design.
Sure, but it's really nice to start thinking about it now, so that I guess so that it shouldn't be such a jarring activity to try and slot that in later. You can really try and be aware of it as you build the MVP app, so that it's sort of
Right.
a gaming receptive or gaming ready in a way. So it's nice
Yes.
to be,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Any other questions? Yes.
One of the main challenges that we face is we're trying to build a marketplace for people to rent and lease their bicycles. And the price points for bicycles are quite low, and so a lot of people in the P2P marketplace think that it won't really work for low margin or low margin, high volume type products. And especially we're building this hardware to be able to kind of enable this interaction. So when we're talking about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, obviously we could do is we can say that you're going to be able to monetize your bicycle by renting it out. But if the reward level is not high enough, like what other types of ways that we can use to monetize or to incentivize people to create this behavior to like rent out their bikes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any ideas offhand, but that's the question, right?
Yeah.
The question is, why else would they want to? Maybe it's to feel part of a community. Maybe it's to feel like you're helping out people that you couldn't otherwise. And that comes down to knowing who your audience is. For instance, again, going back to the driving app, we did a bunch of research to test out our theories about what pain point we wanted to hit. And one of the things we learned is that a lot of people really want to feel like they're helping out other drivers on the road. Like that, and we were completely surprised by that. Like they were like, I would really value the opportunity to leave a little message to help out other drivers at the traffic jam I just got out of. We're like, why do you want to do that? You know what they said? They said, because when I'm in traffic, I get really angry, and I cannot be angry when I get to work. I have to be smooth. I have to be in a good mood. And if I feel like I'm helping someone else, you've just helped me be in a better mood, so I walk in the door with a smile on my face, right? Had no idea, right? So I think my answer to you is basically come up with a hypothesis and do some research. Do some structured research, qualitative research, interviews, field studies, whatever, but talk to people. Because that's where you'll actually get your good ideas, is asking those kind of open-ended, pointed questions. So rather than me, since I don't know, since I'm not gonna rent my bike out. But, and that goes for all of you, and I'm happy to talk more about that at a future time. I also need to do a time check.
4:15.
Okay, I need to leave in about 5 minutes. About just how to incorporate research. There's a lot of different ways, but basically coming up with assumptions and then testing them is just a really great loop to be getting into.
So since we're all building hardware products, generally the user would have to pay some money to purchase the product first.
Right.
Do you think that monetary investment is going to motivate them to put more effort into our ecosystem that we design? And do you think we can design based around that?
I think it depends on the system, and it depends on whether you're monetizing past the initial purchase. So if somebody, has some sunk cost, they've bought a piece of hardware, they want to get use out of the hardware, but if your ecosystem delivers value to them, yes. If your ecosystem is sort of an and they put money into the hardware, there's no motive, and like, why would they use your ecosystem? If your ecosystem is giving them value and extracting more money out of them, if you've got some sort of monthly fee or like add-ons or anything like that, then your whole design is going to revolve around them. But if you don't have if you don't have any further monetization, why are you investing in a whole ecosystem if there's no further monetization after they've bought it? Is it to get them to tell their friends about it so you can sell more hardware widgets? Then, like, so to me, all of that, like, drives the design. Like, oh, it would be nice to have an ecosystem there to interact with, but one, what's the value to them, and two, what's the value to you? And, I mean, there's probably answers to that, but, you know about the sunk cost. You know about what sunk cost is, yeah. So, I mean, that's the only thing there, but people in general don't, they don't put their time into something repeatedly that doesn't deliver value and meet some core need that they have. And that's a general answer, but.
I guess because for us, in a lot of cases, the software is very much tied into the hardware, but I guess in a lot of cases, you can use the hardware as a standalone product.
What's the hardware?
For us, it's the headphones. So
I see.
for us, basically the idea is that once they would want to buy the headphones, because they're kind of music curators, they really want to share the music that they listen to. So to get them to be using our app and using that to share their music and sharing with other people around them.
I see. So the app is necessary to fulfill on the promise of the hardware.
Yeah.
And it's sort of part of the hardware.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you didn't use the app for yourself, or anything, you still use them as regular headphones? So I guess that's what he's getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't, I think I'd have to understand a lot more about your app to really give you some coherent answer there. So, so I'm gonna need to take off, but as I said, I will make sure you guys all get a copy of this, and I really appreciate your taking the time to listen, and I would be happy, you know, once we get our office hours and stuff set up, happy to come and, you know, talk to you in a little more depth about the specifics of what you're doing and how these ideas apply to your projects.